Today, I'd like to share on a topic that is very dear to my heart, and it's been in my vision for many, many years, something that has been cultivating and brewing within me probably since birth for various reasons, some from healthy places, some from not so healthy places. I'm not going to unpack that here, but I want to touch more on what is community living, what is co-housing, co-living, intentional living, what is that all really about? And as some of you are aware, it's shared spaces with others, and there's an intentionality with it. It can be with friends and or biological family. We know this is not a new concept. This is something that all of us have at some strands of our ancestry. Our ancestors lived like this. And there still are some cultures today that still live like this as well. And, with this kind of concept, it can be anything from a group of people all living in a house together, all the way to there being a large eco village where everyone has their own little dwelling, and there's like commerce going on, and people can come visit, and there could be different kind of studios or shops or bakeries or whatever. And then there's a whole lot of other things in between that kind of spectrum, right? And it can be like there's shared spaces, and often with the shared spaces, they're outdoor spaces, right? But if you're living in a house, there might be shared, lounges and other kind of areas like that as well. And, a lot of this kind of living is all about collaboration, connection, and mutual support. And for some, modern living or the life of modernity can be quite isolating, even if one does live in a city. Now, there's probably some interesting psychology I'm not going to unpack here in regards to confining people into a space that they are not on the same page with many things, and what that can kind of do to the human psychology. Even though there's a physical proximity of people being around you, it can still feel quite isolating because you're not being seen, heard, felt in the way that you're experiencing life. But we won't need to go into that anymore. And so, obviously with that isolation, it's like people are seeking more of an authentic communication and companionship, conversation, and they're not experiencing that around them. There's conversation that can be had, but it's not feeling authentic to them, or it's not aligned to their values, right? And so when you're living with others that you have similar values and you're experiencing life in somewhat of a similar way, or a way in which people are being seen, heard, felt, and recognized in particular ways, that isolation can kind of like dissolve in a particular way. And for many people in certain nations, and you'll probably find particular generations are a lot more drawn to this way of living. Me being a millennial, that is something that's quite common among the millennial generation, in particular nations around the world, a lot of a draw to that. And some of those reasons are also material in nature. There is this kind of rising in living costs that some people are feeling affected by. And when you can pull resources together, it can create higher quality housing, and when you've got higher quality housing, it means you can then also have a higher quality of life in a certain way, right? So, when I'm talking about higher quality housing, I'm not talking about like multi-million-dollar mansions. I'm talking about homes that are built with particular materials. They have a particular quality about them. They have aspects built into them that help with heating and cooling. There's design aspects of them as well. And there's so much more I can unpack there. But also, obviously, with pulling resources together and there's the alignment of values, you can then dive more into certain aspects of sustainability. You can be growing food on the land that you're living together with, creating like closed loop water systems and other kinds of systems that are closed loop. You're not having to outsource the getting rid of something or bringing something into the property. You're cultivating it within the closed loop system. Obviously there can be things like sharing transport. You can be creating energy together through like solar panels, water. There's many other things there as well. And then also, you can be pulling things together like tool libraries. Why do you need to have a lawnmower for 10 people living in the same block when you might only need one, and you alternate as to who gets to use the lawnmower at what times. So not only is it, I've just touched on there about sort of material resources, right? There's also these resources that are not necessarily material in nature. And that's where we get into things like support systems and healthcare. So there can be sharing of things like childcare and elderly care, emotional support, sharing of skills, and also sharing of wisdom, right? And there's another aspect to it as well, in that there can be more of a draw to stay in the home if one desires to. They're not having to leave because they need to work a certain amount of hours to get a certain level of income. Maybe they can drop back the amount of hours. Maybe they can find out a way in which they can cultivate abundance on the property, and when people are not having to leave because they feel like they need to, they're only leaving because they actually desire to go to the market, or they want to go on a trip somewhere, or there's actual like a desire to leave, and it's from a healthy place. There people can be, quite drawn to stay at home, but not to stay at home to isolate, but to stay at home because it's like, I don't need to go out. If I want to have a nice cup of tea with someone, I just walk 20 meters to my neighbor's place and we have a catch up. That's one example, right? But with that, not having to travel so much and not having to leave the space that you feel so nourished by, it can mean that you've also got more capacity to show up. Not just in the physical doing, but also like in the being aspects, right? In that emotional and mental realm, and which, can be quite healthy, right? The more capacity you have to show up for the self and for the community, it adds value to the community itself. And as long as it's not solely resting on you, those aspects, right, it's being shared around, I can't even imagine like how much exponentially that could be nourishing for a human being. So yes, there's a desire to move into these kinds of ways of living if one's not already, or if they are and then they're considering whether they want to step into a different way that works for them. And a lot of this is about redefining our idea of success, redefining our idea of lifestyle. What does that look like for you? What does that feel like for you? What is it like engaging with that for you? It's really moving away from what some may call a hustle culture. And for some, they're drawn to that, and that's their draw. But if it's not something that you're drawn to, then you're pondering on, well, this isn't for me. So what other ways can I engage with life while I'm here, right? And one thing I've noticed with a lot of people that are living in this way and it's functioning well is that they're really welcoming in a lot more joy, purpose, and quality of life. And those are things that many of us want for everyone. We really want that, like not just for ourselves, but we really want that everyone. Because when people are experiencing joy and purpose and a quality of life, there's just so many issues that we're told, right, about that just literally dissolve away. Now, I'm not saying everything's rainbows and unicorns, because, the biggest hurdle from what I've noticed, not just necessarily about, one of them people talk about is this monetary kind of, there's a monetary kind of, how would I say it, barrier for some people to get into this. Because also a lot of people that are drawn to this way are not necessarily into the hustle culture. They may not necessarily be working some kind of like 6-figure salary job or whatever it is, or they may not have been born into some kind of wealth. So, there can be a monetary barrier, but it also means that the monetary barrier to say, like, if you were, oh, I'm going to buy a house on my own or just with my partner, like the barrier for that when you're with a group of people is actually much less, right? Than if it's just to be done with 1 or 2 people. But the other biggest challenge that I often see is what we would probably associate with being interpersonal relationships. And you really need great emotional intelligence and very clear vision for the interpersonal relationships to work well. So there's many people who wouldn't desire to live this way, because it would also mean that they would have to face a whole lot of internal world that they're not willing to, and that's okay. But if you want to evolve further, you have to lean into that, and this is what a lot of this community co-housing living is, that it's going to be constantly asking you to lean into these inner worlds that can feel quite uncomfortable. And obviously, if you're nourishing yourself in a particular way and you're willing to grow and learn, then you're going to get better and better at emotional regulation, your emotional intelligence. And if everyone else is also willing to do their work in that realm as well, then it can flow a lot better. And, conflict resolution can happen with a lot more ease. Co-living and community living, co-housing, intentional living is not about everything's all like rainbows and unicorns and nothing bad ever happens. It's like things are going to happen. So make sure you've got systems and processes in place, and also be discerning about who it is that you're wanting to live with, right? Either you're starting this up with a group of people or you're coming into a place that's already established. So doing your research and taking some time to get this right in a certain way. You're having a right relationship with what this is. There's so much more I could unpack about this topic. Like, wow, I'm very passionate about it, and like to the point where actually there's work that I do now where I do assist people with setting these up. Now, this is only going to be relevant if you are living in Australia, and in particular if you're living in Queensland or New South Wales. And I don't share a lot about that kind of work on here, and I don't intend to, but I am in a place now where I'm actually able to help people set these kind of things up, and it's so exciting. And I can't even fathom right now, like, what that could look like to be part of helping people create these things. Of course I desire that for myself, but not just for me, like to be part of creating such beautiful spaces for people to live in, even though it's not a new concept. And a lot of us have been pushed out of that concept and believed, we've got to be super independent, we can't be codependent, when many of us are aware now it's actually more about interdependence, and we've actually got to do our inner work to really make this work. So you're having that clear communication, having that clear vision is really going to help. And also sharing responsibilities that are within the person's interests and skill sets. So sometimes that may mean saying no to someone to join in a particular way because you already have so many people with a particular niche of a skill set. That may not be the case for every kind of type of community living, but depending on the size, and this is where there can be so many variations of how this works, right? And, there's always going to be cultural nuances as well. So hence why there's going to be a variety of that. And, community living is not just like one framework of how that works. There's so many people from all sorts of different ages, all sorts of different cultures, all sorts of different perspectives on how to live life, and it could be different political views, different all sorts of things, right? And doesn't mean to say that they all need to live together, but because of these slight nuances of human expression, it means that there will definitely be a community or group of people out there that are like you. It's just a matter of finding each other sometimes, right? So, yeah, I love imagining like a world or a community for people where they can celebrate life on a regular basis. It's not just something that happens because of like some commercial holiday, or a holiday that was probably once had a religious or a ritual perspective is being commercialized, or like it's something that, like, what is the vision and the values of that community, and then creating celebrations together. I mean, I'm such a such a fiend for festivals and gatherings, and when I talk about festivals, I'm talking like small music, lifestyle, outdoor kind of doof. There's camping kind of things, right? And I just love that sort of thing. And I love the idea of people living together to create smaller gatherings together, because a lot of us go to these things like festivals because we're seeking a way to celebrate life. And of course, we're all seeking connection, and everyone has their own variations of how they try to get that connection. Yes, some people are really into like illegal substances, or substances are not illegal, but let's just call them drugs. And then there's others that are seeking connection through other ways. And yeah, I can see how this community living can nourish some of that aspect as well. All of our ancestors celebrated particular events. And instead of, having to drive an hour to get somewhere, or once in a blue moon you see a friend who's like from overseas or whatever, and you celebrate something, it's like there's celebrations happening on a regular basis. And what regular looks like for you is going to probably be different to what regular looks like for me. Hence why it could be quite important that we really get this kind of thing up and going and practicing. And I know there's this whole hippie commune that was really big in the 70s. I mean, starting most places in the 60s, and a lot of them had faded out by the 80s, but you can see where some of those shortfalls are. So do your research. Like, why did they really collapse? What was going on there? Some of you are probably aware that each generation has its own gifts that are brought through as well. So some challenges that were probably carried through in that particular generation may not be as present, but then there might be particular challenges that a particular generation of this kind that would not have been present here. So you're really going to have to do a lot of research, not just the logical, but getting into the psychological aspects as well of this kind of living. So if you've got any more questions, let me know. You can reach out to me on various social media links. You can also write a comment in the comment section down below, and I'll see you in the next vlog.